Welcome back to the McCoy Leadership Podcast, elevating your impact through valuable insights and conversations about leadership. Welcome back to another episode of the McCoy Leadership Podcast. And today, from across the ocean in a different country, we have Yosi Kossowsky with us. And Yosi is a seasoned executive coach with over 18 years of experience. He comes with an engineering background, which we won't hold against him. And he has a lot of great insights. And today we're going to get into talking about communication and maybe a little bit of neuroscience of how all of that works underneath of there. Yosi, welcome. And why don't you tell us a little bit about how you got to where you are today?
Thanks, Amos. Yeah. So I started off my career in the early 90s in IT, and it was a great time to be in IT because nobody knew what it was, and we all got to play around pretty much unabashedly. And then early 2000s, I tried technical sales, and then 9/11, the market crashed, I got laid off, and I moved into engineering, specifically something called systems engineering. And we were putting up what was called head ends for television broadcasters, and loved role, great. At some point, I started having more responsibility to lead people or direct people, and I started getting feedback that I wasn't good at it. And I'm saying it nicely. I mean, as engineers, we didn't really, we cut right to the chase, and we would kind of say you suck. So I was really kind of taken aback when I got the feedback. What didn't I understand? What wasn't I doing right? And as an engineer, it's all about, okay, you take knowledge, you transfer it, and you do it, and you see if it works or doesn't work. And people are not like that. It's not like you see right away if it works or doesn't work. So as I was trying to figure out how do I learn what I don't understand? How do I learn how to apply things that I thought I understood, like active listening, being patient, really trying to understand somebody else's point of view, or something even like really crazy, like empathy. So I had a couple of friends who pointed me in the direction of something called emotional wellness therapy. And as I started going to these workshops and these retreats, I started to really open to a whole new world of things that I didn't even realize was there. So not only to really get into a sense of understanding my emotions, but also where they're coming from, where are the triggers, why are there triggers, how to recognize them, how to understand what I can do with them that ultimately can lead me to respond and react differently. And I had, heard once, you can always control how you respond and react. And I'm like, that is so not true. But then I kind of learned that I could do more than I thought. So as I was learning all about myself and the role of this, it really helped me start to understand other people and how I was interacting with others, certainly at home and then at work. And those interactions really started to change. Along the way, I got really curious about, as an engineer, what's the hardware that this whole emotional system is running on, the body, the brain, and what does all these different things that I had been hearing about peripherally really mean? For example, we have these different chemicals that go through our body at different times: adrenaline, cortisol, serotonin, dopamine. I'm like, what is that, and what is the impact on the whole system? And what is it that we really need to be doing to be thriving as a system, as an organism, as a brain, as a body? And then the part that was really confounding to me was, as I was learning a lot more about our whole emotional ecosystem, what we can do about it, I kept on feeling that my rational side and my emotional side were playing whack-a-mole with each other. And I'm like, what? Why? Why is that my brain doesn't work together? And I really wanted to understand that. So started studying different areas of neuroscience and because I wanted to make it really applicable, I found a course on a therapeutic version of neuroscience. And so I was taking all my vacation time and learning, applying it. And in 2010, I completed my certifications, still working as an engineer. My life had changed, my reactions, my relationships had all shifted. And I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do with it, but it was pointed out to me by HR that if I wanted to continue to use these skills in the workplace, I needed to get a coaching certification. So I'm like, okay, how is becoming a baseball coach going to really help me do this at work? And they're no, not that type of coaching. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I found a course that fit along with the mindset that I had been learning in terms of the therapeutic, and went out to England and got certified in something called conscious leadership coaching. So I started doing it on the side, really, without having a plan to ever leave engineering. But a year and a half later, the company I was in got acquired by a much larger company, and the acquisition was pretty difficult for us as the acquired company from a people perspective. And the morale changed, and our leaders stopped communicating. And so a few months in, I decided I have tools here. I have some things that I maybe can help. And I went and offered coaching to some of the leaders who took me up on it, and started really seeing some great impact from that. Then I created a program to help the average individual contributor start to make this integration into the new company, and had a lot of success with that. So much so that HR came and said to me, we want you to do this at all of the acquisition sites. And so pretty much that was the time, I don't even remember the day, but the time where I said goodbye to engineering and went hello to human engineering, and started spending time, in addition to the US, in places like Canada, England, France, Germany, Netherlands, a couple of places in India, Israel, Hong Kong, Malaysia, Singapore. And as I was spending time in these different countries working with leaders and teams on this integration, on helping them integrate, I started understanding the role of culture and gender and generation on all of these aspects. How are we communicating? How do we deal with emotion? How do we deal with our triggers? What is the role of culture on all of these things? And I quickly found myself doing more and more work in different functions in this company, whether it was in engineering or sales or customer success or operations, helping leaders and teams become more effective. So I didn't have a plan. I was just having a great time and felt I was doing something very meaningful and purposeful. COVID hit, late end of 2020. I got laid off from the company that I was in and wasn't ready to try to go out on my own. So I landed a job as an HR leader, and then had that for a few months, and then landed a job as a chief technology officer. And I went back into technology mostly because of the opportunity, not because I was sure that's where I wanted to head. And it was a lot of fun and very educational. And it really did help me understand that the thing that gave me the most feeling of purpose was coaching. And so for the last few years, I went out on my own and have been really blessed and lucky to work with a lot of leaders in lots of different industries. And that's what brings me to you today.
Awesome. So as I think about that story, which is a pretty amazing story, well, on one hand, only an engineer is going to go decide that they need to also understand how the human body runs to understand it all. But as you went through that, you made a transition from being somebody that was looked at as a terrible leader. You said people, told you that you kind of suck at this, to now being a coach that can teach things that are applicable. How was that process? How did your team, the first team, did you tell them, I'm working on this, I'm going to take some time, I'm going to learn how to become a better communicator? Or did you just one day show up and you were all of a sudden magically a better communicator? Tell me a little bit about that time period there. How did that go? How did your team react? And how did you feel through that process?
So So when I started going down this path, I dragged my wife with me. So my wife by education has a master's in psychology, already was well knowledgeable in a lot of these things, but I wanted her to come along with me on this journey because it was so foreign to me, really.
Yep.
And so the first hit came when our children started like kind of being afraid of us, or like, putting up the finger cross and saying, who are you vampires? Get away. Where's my real parents? Because we started changing. And, one of those first realizations was how much of my own, am I allowed to use any language on this,
Sure.
on this podcast?
Sure.
Okay. How much of my own shit I was dumping on my kids, and I didn't know. And I started to stop. The more I learned, the more I realized I really wanted to put it into practice. And my kids, I think, really didn't know what to do with the change that they were experiencing in us. And I don't think we could really recognize what their experience of us was, how to bridge that. So that was really my first opening into noticing how the shifts were starting to play out. And I wasn't therefore sure whether this was good or bad, given their reaction.
Yep.
In the workplace, the reaction was really kind of weird. My boss knew what I was doing. I didn't really tell my team what I was doing. And I'm not sure my boss bought into anything that I was doing initially. I think he thought like this is all very woo-woo, fluffy stuff. And it was only a little later that when I could come with different techniques about, wait a second, let's not assume we understand what that person is saying. Let's go find out what that person's actually saying. And this whole idea of starting to recognize assumptions and move away from assumptions and more into curiosity spaces, that it started to dawn on people that some of the things I was learning actually were pretty cool and gave us a different way to approach problem solving, especially people problem solving, and helping people have more space to show up as themselves rather than trying to conform into something that we were trying to make them into. So no, it wasn't in any way something I shared overtly with anybody. Honestly, I was a little embarrassed in those early days by what I was doing because it was so we used to, enjoy thinking that we were all Spock. So from Star Trek, like
Yeah.
the idea of adding emotion into it wasn't necessarily like the prize to be won at the time. It was only later that the value and the meaning really became more clear to me. Initially, as I said, it was really for me to understand myself better and what I didn't understand. Then I started really having tools to help myself, and that became the primary goal. The fact that it started having add-on benefits wasn't in any way my initial, I would say, intention or focus. It was all things that became apparent as they were, as I was recognizing or being told by others that this is having an impact.
So out of curiosity, I'm sure prior to this time, you had taken other classes, courses, things throughout your career.
Mm-hmm.
And so many times, and you mentioned earlier, you started to learn and apply. Was there a moment where it kind of hit you that, like, me applying this is really working? And what kept you applying? Because so many times we take a class or we read a book and it's great knowledge, but we don't apply it, so it doesn't become useful unless we're writing a book or doing something like that. So was there a moment where you kind of said, you know what, this is really working and it makes sense? I'm just curious.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so a little bit more details under the hood. The emotional wellness therapy was not the first training that I took. I took a couple of other ones first. And to get certified in them, all of them required you to have practice, right? To kind of do an internship where you did the work for free with people who volunteered and, kind of like free therapy. And so there were 3 other therapies that I got into before this emotional wellness therapy work. And my most available source of people to try it with were coworkers. And so, I kind of got known for this guy who was offering these free therapy types of things, and everyone understood I was in training. So all of that was clear. But none of them really made a difference to people. And so I remember the first time I did this emotional wellness therapy session with somebody, and they were like, holy cow, I've never realized that about myself before. And then 2 weeks later, they're like, so much is changing just because of that one session. And I'm like, this is it. This is the real stuff. And so that was, for me, that turning point that said, I think that I finally found something that really does make a difference in helping ourselves learn more about ourselves. And it was also in hindsight, those other things that I had learning were I treated them extremely cerebrally, and maybe that's why it didn't have the impact that the teachers said that they would have. Where this forced me to get more attuned to my emotional state. And I ultimately think that made the biggest difference.
So interestingly, in my mind, I believe, for my clients and I do offer occasionally open sessions, so to speak, where people can sign up and they can come to learn about something. The most popular that I do is DISC, because the reason I say it's most popular because I do it more often, because my belief is if people and business leaders can't communicate, there can be great systems that you want to learn about or processes, but if you can't communicate, how are you ever going to apply it in your organization? So what are your thoughts on the kind of, I guess I'm preloading the question a little bit, but do you think businesses fail at instituting new things, new leadership styles, processes, and other pieces because they don't have the self-awareness and the ability to be able to communicate well within their own organization? Is that something that can add to it? Or should they go after all of those things that they think are going to create better efficiency, better bottom line? Does communication and emotional awareness come first in your mind, or can you put all that other stuff ahead of it and then do the emotional awareness and communication later?
So I'm going to fall right into your opened trap there. And yes, I think that by a lot of the material I've read and experienced over these years, I really have come to my current understanding experience is that we are emotional beings trying to have a cognitive experience and not the other way around. Meaning that emotions are the main driver for our behaviors, and our cognitive executive functioning ability is trying to hold on as tight as it can and drive a speeding car that all we have is the steering wheel but not the pedals too, let's say. So I really not met people, Amos, that want to come and screw up.
Yep.
I've not met an employee that says, I am here to screw up today. And so people come to work really with the best of intention. And if things aren't going right, it's not because of a lack of good intent. It comes down to understanding and shared understanding, which can lead to shared commitment and shared outcomes. So you can throw 100 different leadership ideas, competencies, etc. You can do employee performance policies. You can even do DISC, Myers-Briggs, etc. To me, the first step is I need to do this to understand myself better, because I am part of the equation. And if I keep myself as a black box in this equation, and I am expecting that everybody knowing my DISC type will make the difference, it won't be enough. I need to understand my DISC type. I need to understand what that means and how that influences how I make sense of the world, how I approach my conversations. And then use that knowledge to then also say, now I want to bridge to you. So I don't know if that exactly answered your question.
Yeah.
From the way I heard your question, I'm saying yes, all in.
And you know, when I do DISC training, one of the first slides that I have, we spend a fair amount of time on understanding that this is not something to put everybody in a box. This is something for you to understand. Another thing that I think is so valuable as we talk about youth is starting there for them to understand that everybody's different, but predictably different, and kind of working through that. Now, you talk quite a bit in your work about self-awareness, and you know, I read some of your work and I was thinking about that, and I thought, well, why would self-awareness be important at all? Because obviously I'm in charge and I was put there because I was really good at what I did. So I don't need to care or have self-awareness about me. Everybody else just needs to kind of fall in line, right? Have you ever encountered that, you know, that type of leadership? And how would you approach that? If somebody out there listening is thinking, well, no, I'm at the top and I got there because of everything that I did. So it's not about me, it's about everybody else, and they need to change and fall in line with what I want. How would you approach that?
What's funny is I actually was just coaching a leader like that earlier today. So, and I want to say that even that leader wants to do their best. So, because I guess of my engineering mindset, I approach these conversations from, here's the science behind this idea. And the first part of it is subjective perception. And so I say this word, and then I say to the person I'm working with, what do you know currently about subjective perception? So Amos, if you're willing to do this little play with me for a second, I'll show you how I do it.
Sure,
right?
absolutely.
So, Amos, what do you know about subjective perception?
In my mind, I would say that subjective perception is putting myself in a place to kind of understand what lens am I looking at whatever the situation is through, and understanding that I can change that lens.
Okay, cool. So this lens, do you get to choose the lens that you are having at any given point in time?
I think that's a multi-answer question, but I believe you can change your lens if you're aware of it. But
did you just say the word aware?
I did.
Oh, okay. Go on.
And but I believe what creates that lens is, and I think it was Stephen Covey that called it the autobiographical lens. But it's whatever's happened to us and what we've lived through in our life is typically, if we're unaware, that is the lens that we're always going to look through. But sometimes, if we're aware of that, we can kind of step out of that and look at it through a more objective lens, or look at it through, why is someone else acting the way they are? And maybe we've hit one of their triggers, kind of using your terminology, but putting ourselves and looking at it from multiple perspectives. That's my thought.
Okay. I love it. Thank you. So you said some really interesting things. One is the autobiographical lens, right? So do you think, from your knowledge of people, that any two people share the same autobiographical lens?
No, unless they were Siamese twins, I would say not. And probably not even then either.
So that means that each of us has this autobiographical lens.
Correct.
Okay. And then you mentioned the word awareness, right? So it requires some level of awareness that I have this autobiographical lens. And then maybe it even requires a deeper sense of awareness to understand how is that influencing how I'm making sense of the world.
Absolutely.
Without that, it's autopilot.
Yep.
It's happening in the brain. Why would we question how our brain is making sense of the world? That's how my brain makes sense of the world. But then again, if no two people are sharing their lenses, what does that inherently mean for our conversation right now? What is the chance that the way you're hearing me through your lens is the same way that I'm talking to you through my lens?
There's a very high probability that my understanding will be slightly different than what your intention was.
Okay. So if your understanding is going to be at least slightly different than my intention, and vice versa, and accuracy in getting work done is important, how do we account for whatever those differences might be if we want to be more effective than we are today?
One, I think making sure that people have the understanding that we intend, and sometimes that is, thinking about work can be as simple as, when the conversation is over, what I really need is, we're here right now. By tomorrow afternoon at the close of business, we need to be here. Can we agree upon that? And these are the outcomes that we must have to get there, and making sure that they have that understanding. I think the other piece is, if we recognize that someone is not getting, and again, that's back to awareness, if they're not getting what we're trying to put across to them, we may need to adjust our delivery or adjust how we're communicating with them to be sure that we get it across.
Yep. So the next question I ask a leader is, on average, right? Not for you have a team of people, some you've worked with for a long time, but on average, how often do you get back what you ask for the very first time around? So you sit down, like you just explained, hey, I need this by tomorrow. I think you said end of day, and this is the outcomes, etc. How often do you get that back 100% what you want, what you were expecting?
See, this is unfair because I'm a leadership guy too, but the real answer is probably 50% of the time. And part of that, though, comes back to, and I don't want to be wrong, but I believe it was Spencer Johnson. He had a thing in, I think it was the 1 Minute Manager, but the receiver of any message believes that message to be true until something happens to change their perception. And so another step is follow-up. If there's 3 days in between, go back on day number 2 and say, hey, I'm just checking in to make sure that you're on track and you still have a good understanding, and kind of just touching on it. Because a lot of times people can leave a conversation, and then when you introduce other people, so-and-so said, no, I don't think that's what Yosi meant. I think, because I talked to him right after that and he told me this, and all of a sudden it changes and you receive something back that is not what you had agreed upon because they had some other things happen to change their perception.
Yes. And right. So if you could learn how to increase your success rate of getting back what you asked for the first time from 50% to 75%? Would that be worth some effort?
Absolutely.
So that's how I start the conversation. Is if we can start to recognize the impact of this idea. So first, buy into the fact that this autobiographical lens, subjective lens exists. And then start to think about what is the practical impact of that and make it real. And that there is things we can do. And you've started to mention a few. The challenge, by the way, of what you're saying, from my point of view, is you're going into the what. And the hardest part for me was recognizing that learning what didn't teach me how to do that. How do I validate their understanding? How do I make sure that when I say tomorrow that they really understand that I, by the way, mean 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and not they might be, in the world we live in today, they might be on Pacific time or in another country time. And so when I say end of day, they're thinking end of their day. And then I don't get it when I'm expecting, and so on and so forth. Is where I find that the role that you and I are gifted to play of helping people slow down and think about not just the ideas of it, but the actual application of it is where it makes all the difference.
Absolutely. You remind me of a story, real life example, and this was the moment in my life that I realized communication was more than transferring information. I had early in my career, I had a supervisor that worked for me second shift. And we had on that property, we had this large 2,000 gallon propane tank that was filled by a tractor and trailer. And that's what we used to fill all of our forklifts and everything. Behind the one building, there was an old diesel fuel tank that was not used. And I left him a note one night that said, with a list of maybe 3 or 4 things that I needed done that night. And one of them was to use spray paint and spray paint not in use on the old diesel fuel tank. And at 3:00 the next morning, when the first shift was coming in, I get a phone call, which I was not happy about to begin with. And they said, "What's wrong with the propane tank? Why can we not fill our forklifts?" I said, "What are you talking about?" And they said, "There's a big spray painted on this 2,000 gallon tank that says do not, or not in use." I said, "I think I know what happened, but let me come in and we'll take a look." When that manager or supervisor came back in, I said, "Obviously there might've been a misunderstanding here." I said, "But let's talk about how we got to this misunderstanding." What I uncovered was when he went to the rest of the people on that crew, told him what he had to do, they said, "Well, that doesn't make any sense. We don't even use that thing. So why would we put a sign on it that says not in use because we don't use it?" He must mean the propane tank. And so his perception changed. He reasoned through it and he put the note on the wrong item. And it could have been very simply solved by me saying, and that's back to kind of that autobiographical lens. Sometimes we assume that people have information. And what he didn't know was we were getting an inspection by a safety audit company the following day. And that was one of the things I had identified that needed to be done. And if I would have explained that, it would have been done. But that was the moment where I understood how important communication was. Now, I'm curious, you get into the neuroscience of this, as well. And from your experiences, and I think early on you talked about the emotional side and the brain kind of having whack-a-mole with each other. From your experiences, does it make a difference if somebody has a strong belief or a strong mission or a strong faith even? Does that make it easier or harder for them to become more self-aware? So if somebody is really driven and has a personal mission statement and that mission statement is tied to their core values, are they set up for success of a system like this? Or does it make it harder for them because they have that instilled in them? I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
Really interesting question. I'm not sure I have a full-blown answer to that. So here's an answer that I hope encompasses it. If we could magically take a perspective for a second that for me to be right, you don't need to be wrong. Meaning, what if multiple rights could all coexist even if they seem in opposition to one another?
Yep.
Okay. The goal is not me to be right and you to be wrong. The goal is for me to understand what is your version of right and me to understand what is your version of right. And then how do we talk to each other? In a sense, let's go back to DISC. If I can understand that I have got a style, all right? So let's say, and I'm not a D, but let's say I have a primary D style and you have a primary, let's go all the way to this side, S style, okay? It's not that a D is better than an S. They're just different styles. And if I can understand what it means for me to be operating from that point of view or that style of a D mindset, approach, communication style, and that yours is different, and then I can say, okay, understanding that I now can bridge better, then we bridge better. So I actually have never found that someone's moral system, religious system is really the impedance to success. It is more the idea that I don't know where we started in the world, that it's a power play. That for me to be right, you need to be wrong, and therefore my way must trump your way, versus, well, your way is your way, my way is my way. Let's understand each other's ways and find out if we want to work together, if we need to work together to be successful, and in companies that's, kind of where we're at, then how do we find our bridges?
Yep, that makes sense. And the reason I asked the question was that so many times, and it was kind of leading into my next question. So many times, I believe people do think they have, somebody has to be wrong and somebody has to be right. And two people that can communicate really well, just as an example, you could have a satanic cult leader and a Jewish leader, and they come together and could create an amazing idea if they had some reason to be working together. They can still work and be a win-win for everybody. And it's all back to how do we communicate, to your point, and how do we work with folks? And so the next question, which I'll be honest, I wasn't sure because of everything that is going on here in the United States today. I wasn't sure that I was going to touch on, but you do a lot of work and have talked about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And my question is probably a little bit different than where most would end up, but I have thought about this specifically over the past 6 months quite a bit. And my question, at a simplistic level, or maybe it's a complex level, I'm not sure. Does all of this become solved if we just start to value people, for all people, for the skills and the talents that they have? Does this all go away, the idea of diversity, inclusion, and equity? I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
So I will naturally take this back to self-awareness.
Yep.
So my way of making sense of bias is it falls into one of two buckets. Either it's my preference or it's my comfort. So one example is, do you like ice cream, Amos?
Absolutely.
What's your favorite flavor?
Vanilla.
What's your absolutely worst flavor?
I don't know. My daughter recently told me she made her own flavor, and it was like, hot pepper wild cherry. I would say something like that. So hot pepper wild cherry.
Okay. So you have a bias for vanilla and a bias against hot pepper cherry, I
Yes.
think you said, right? Okay. So on one level, biases are preferences. And on the second level, our biases is our comfort. And again, that whole autobiographical lens piece plays a big role in what we are comfortable with, that we are brought up to be comfortable with.
Yep.
The more that I can understand that, as you were mentioning earlier, what parts are playing a role in that autobiographical lens? What do I do? What do I have a preference for? What makes me more comfortable? What makes me less comfortable? Okay, so now I'm aware that that's there. Maybe I'm going to be curious and say, well, I wonder why I have these levels of comfort or not, or just accept that that's where it is. Then the question is acting out on these preferences and comforts helping me be the person I want to be, helping me have the impact I want to have, helping me achieve the things that I want to achieve, or not? And then make a decision of, I understand that that's what's driving is my preferences and my comforts. What is that doing to how I'm showing up, how I'm interacting, the choices that I'm making, etc.? And I think that if we could start there, then we could start to understand that if something about somebody else is making me uncomfortable, firstly, it's not about that other person. It's about my preferences and my comforts being jarred. It's not about that other person or whatever it is about that other person that is triggering my discomfort.
Makes
If I
sense.
could possibly own that, if we could all possibly own that, I think we would be in a hugely different place as a world.
And do you think as well, though, it is fair to say, if we're on the opposite side of that and we are receiving what we believe to be a bias against us,
Mm-hmm.
should we not also try to put ourselves into the other person's shoes to just understand a little bit of what lens are they looking through so that maybe we can help as well? And I'll give a short example. My grandfather was a prisoner of war during World War II. He was captured by the Germans. And in the 1980s, women's high boots became very popular again. And one of my cousins showed up to Christmas or Thanksgiving, I don't remember which, wearing high boots. And he got a little upset and he said, "Could you go outside and take those off?" And she, being a teenager, kind of mouthed back. And I remember the interaction. I was pretty young and I thought, what's happening here? And as I got older, I realized that what happened, and he actually said at that moment, I just didn't understand it, that when I was taken prisoner, when I came out of the foxhole, what I saw were German shepherds and Germans with high boots, and that scares me. And so, that's I guess an extreme example. But my real question is, shouldn't both sides try to understand where the other side is coming from when there is a bias of any type?
In an ideal world, I would say absolutely yes. And I'm a little sensitive to the should word because for me it always implies an assumption. I would love if that were the case. And I have posted on my wall the following statement: hate begets hate, violence begets violence, toughness begets greater toughness. We must meet the forces of hate with the power of love. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that.
I like it.
And just to assign it, it's Martin Luther King. And that is, to me, the essence of this work. Because if I don't try to understand you, then all I do is operate from half of the picture. And if I can't find a way to do what I can to make my bridges, how will we ever meet somewhere along the line?
I like it. So somebody's listening and they say, I'm in, this makes sense. It's something I want to pursue. What are maybe, 3 or 4 actionable steps that they can take today to get started?
Step number 1 is recognize how much we operate on assumption. I've not met a person who's a prophet in this lifetime. And yet our brain is hardwired to make pictures of every next second of the future we plan. And if we really believe and buy into those plans, then when we hit the next moment, the next situation, whatever, and we find that we're jarred because it's not aligning to what we envisioned or what we planned or what we thought, recognize that that's not a problem of the environment or anybody else. That's because I allowed myself to fully buy in to a fictional picture I created in my head. So the first is be more curious. Be more curious when things are not working out the way you want. Maybe it's not about anybody else but yourself. What is it that you brought into this thought, this conversation, this relationship that the other person didn't understand? Very much to your story about the propane tank, right? Is what if you didn't communicate all the context? What if they don't really understand where you're coming from? So that would be, to me, the first one. The second one is if somebody approaches you and says, why did you do that? What are you doing there? See if you can respond with a question instead of a statement or an answer. And the questions can begin with, tell me more about that. Help me understand. What do you mean by that? I really want to understand what you're saying before I respond. Understand that there may be more context before you formulate your answer, especially if it's a defensive mode. And I'm going to stop there, Amos, because I think that those two are huge. If we could just start doing that today, I think we would start to see a difference in our interactions with others.
That is awesome. I think that is applicable in every part of our life. So if somebody wants to engage with you, where are they going to find you at? And, what steps should they take in getting in touch with you if somebody's interested in working directly with you?
Well, so first of all, I would say that, people should feel free to reach out to you as well, because I think you are a master coach. Finding me right now, the best place is on LinkedIn. And I'm in the process of building my website under my own name, so YosiKossowsky.com. And still the best place is the LinkedIn profile. There's a button there to schedule time with me. So that is the address right now.
Awesome. And for everybody listening, we will put it in the show notes with proper spelling, because I don't think if you ask me to type that in after hearing it, I probably wouldn't get it right. So we end every episode with kind of 3 rapid fire questions. The first question really just comes out of so many years of talking with business owners, managers, supervisors, and hearing comments around, when I was young, we did this, or when I was in school, they taught me this, those types of things. My question is, if we could magically get school administrators of our youth across the world in front of us, as a leadership expert, what is one piece of advice that you would give them of something that maybe they can add or put into practice within their system that will help the next generation of leaders be maybe more viable?
Teach them how to make better sense of their emotions. Rather than say, don't get angry, don't yell, don't scream, help them understand where their emotions are coming from and how they can better process them.
I like it. Second question. Over your experience and career, what is your go-to book that over the years you continually to pull back out to get good insights out of?
Predictably Irrational by Dan Ariely.
That's a good book. I like
Yeah.
it. And the last question, I'm always curious to hear, in today's ever-changing world of technology, what do you find to be the most useful or your favorite piece of technology today?
So I'm going to go right into the, probably the most maybe the most common answer is ChatGPT. I'm a little crazy. I pay for ChatGPT, I pay for Claude, I pay for Gemini, and I find that I don't know what I don't know, and putting questions into these platforms bring up ideas or questions that I didn't think of on my own. I'm not looking at it for accuracy or authenticity. I'm looking at how do I maybe see what I'm not seeing or get other ideas. And so I would say that AI right now is my go-to technology tool that I am most thrilled with.
Believe it or not, I just read an article maybe 2 days ago. I don't remember where I read it, but they're estimating that only 10% of adults are actually utilizing AI today on a regular basis. I thought that was kind of amazing. I just recently, I subscribed to several different AIs as well, but I just recently bought it's called a Plaud, Plaud. I just got it last week. And it fits on your phone. And what is awesome about it is when you're in a meeting, you can record the meeting on this little tiny device. If you're on the phone, it'll record the phone call. But what it delivers back to you, you can set it up, is basically the meeting minutes and the deliverables that you said during the meeting, which is, I think is invaluable. Well, Yosi, this has been a lot of fun. I would love to have you back on again. I think we could probably go for another hour or two talking about this, topics as important as not only communication, but understanding more into the neuroscience of it. So hopefully maybe we can have you back on. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Amos. It's really been amazing to be with you today. And absolutely, I'd love to come back. So I look forward to that. And I've learned a lot from you as well. And I look forward to staying in touch.
Awesome. For our listeners, if you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to check out our past episodes, and don't forget to follow us so that you can get alerts whenever the new episodes come out. Till next time, we appreciate all of you.